Okay, now we're good, I think. Okay, great. All right, so what I want you to do is by your day by day, so if you'll go ahead and go into the day by day, I want you to go ahead and click the link that says Common HIP Analysis Issues. So again, what I want you to do is I want you to be on Common HIP Analysis Issues. So, first period today, I came bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, thinking that I taught HIP analysis really well. And then we did the pear deck, and then 80% of the students did horribly on it. So obviously I did not explain it well enough to you. So what I've made for you is a document that will hopefully explain this a little bit better so that you can be able to make the adjustments that you need to be able to understand how to do this HIP analysis. So as a quick reminder, a HIP analysis is choosing 4 of the documents and explaining either the HIPP. The H stands for historical context. The I stands, sorry, I'm like coughing. The I stands for intended audience. The P stands for purpose. And the other P stands for point of view. So I've included with you these examples that I did. Now what I want you to do is I want you to scroll down to the second page. Now, I like 1B just as much as I love all my other students. What I did though is I took all of 1B's answers and I made them into a chart of whether or not they would have or would not have gotten the points. Okay? So what you're going to do in just a second is you're going to look at your best HIP analysis that you did for homework. The one that you feel like you have knocked out of the park. It is phenomenal and you are super, super proud of it. And then what you're going to do is you are going to compare it to this chart to see if you get a cool thumbs up or you get an angry no face. Okay? Now these are all examples from first period today. Of real life ones that people did. Now I want to go through a couple of these to show you good and bad examples that are commonly seen. So with the contextualization, all of these are fantastic contextualization examples. Notice they all start with prior to. They talk about a specific topic that contextualizes the time period. And then you're good to go. Over on the right hand side, by the way, I made some comments about how good it is, so you're happy. There were no failures of contextualization in first period. So intended audience, and again, if this is one of your categories that you are feeling like that's the really good one for you, check to see if you're doing some of these common mistakes. So with intended audience, and this is the one that I really want to emphasize, is this first one's statement. The intended audience for this document was Woodrow Wilson because in the title it says letter to Woodrow Wilson. Okay? Now, is that what you're supposed to do with intended audience? No. I mean, I could say anything like that then. The intended audience of Jane Addams' letter to so-and-so was the person she sent it to because that's who she sent it to. Okay? What you want to do instead is you really want to focus on who is the intended audience and why you should do that. By the way, this is the most common error I see with HIP analysis, is this right here. Instead, notice, for example, this. This source was created for President Wilson, who was president at the time. He was a Democrat who had supported Jim Crow laws. This document aimed at making him have a change of heart. It's most likely focused on changing a person's opinion on African Americans. Notice how they say that this is the intended audience is Wilson to change his mind. Okay? All right, from there, purpose. So a couple things about purpose. So by the way, HIP analysis should be either 2 really long sentences or 3 sentences long. I should be able to tell the document just by reading the HIP analysis. So if you notice, it says the purpose of this document was to give political power back to the people. All these new laws allowed citizens to remove and replace corrupt political leaders. Okay? That doesn't really tell me what the purpose of this actual document is. You're not thinking of the purpose of the new laws. You're thinking, what is the purpose of this individual document? Another thing, too, is if you notice in this one, it goes on to talk about as well how there's settlement houses and this helps immigrants, but that's not what the document is referencing. So make sure that you are actually referencing the topic of this, which I've given you a couple examples. So the purpose of the poster on document 7 is to persuade people into voting for dry laws. This was trying to persuade people, and then it goes into that. That's specific about the purpose. Now, point of view is a really hard one that people don't understand is what is the view of the document. Make sure that you are specific. So, for example, the point of view of Teddy Roosevelt's speech is negative towards trust. Large trusts were gaining too much power, and Teddy Roosevelt didn't like that. He thought robber barons and trusts were dangerous. This is specifically his point of view about trusts. Okay? Now, the last one, which is a number one don't do, and this actually has like a couple of issues. I chose document 1 and did point of view. Never, ever, ever include personal pronouns in your essays. You're writing a formal essay. Make sure that you do that. There's one more that I want to point out too that I totally forgot to talk about. Oh, so one thing too, and this is really, really bad. So we talked about the Woodrow Wilson thing at the beginning, but notice too how it says this may affect the reliability of this source. Some of these reliability and bias, you'll have those questions on the left-hand side. Those are by College Board, not by me. And I'm not a huge fan of the reliability. I personally would not focus on that because I think it's really hard to do. But notice how it says this document was written in order to please him. Was the document to Woodrow Wilson attempting to please Woodrow Wilson? No. So make sure you're analyzing documents correctly. So what you're going to do right now is you are going to look at your best HIP analysis that you did as homework. Once you have found that, I want you to compare it to this chart. Find the happy ones and see if it's similar. If it's similar to the no-no ones, don't do it. Okay? So what I want you to take the opportunity to do is go ahead and take a couple of minutes, beef it up, make it perfect, and then go ahead and put it into Pear Deck. You should already have, 8 of you have already put it in. So you're picking your best HIP analysis and then going ahead and putting it, fixing it, and then putting it into Pear Deck. So right now, that's what you should be doing. So again, right now you should be doing your HIP analysis and submitting it. Remember, you're focusing on the document itself, not just who wrote it. Think about what the document is doing. By the way, really quickly, I want to show you this document right here. So this person is actually trying to do what appears to be multiple HIP. So notice that it says prior to the creation of document 2 was monopolies and trust. You're doing a contextualization. Then you go into the purpose of the document. You only need one letter. So pick one of the letters to do and focus on that. Both of these are correct, but they're both too short to count. So pick one and do it really, really well. So either do contextualization if this is you or purpose. Thank you. Hey, if this is yours up on the board, I think you're not contextualizing the document. So make sure that you're contextualizing the document because this, I don't know of any document that this would work for. So if this is you, you can come ask me about it, but this is actually more of a contextualization for your entire essay and not for the document itself. So make sure if this is you that you adjust that. so take about like 2 more minutes. Make sure it gets in. I only have 23 responses, so make sure you get put in. Okay. All right, so I have gone through a lot of these. Do we want to start with the good or the bad? Bad. Okay. So if these are yours, you're still a great person. Okay. Don't think it's bad. It's just this is a good help for me. Okay. Okay. So this one on the outside looks really good, but let me explain what's wrong with it. So the purpose of his inaugural address is to gain support of the people and to create a government that have a greater say. So this is great. The issue is, notice how they start to go into what a referendum, recall, and initiative is. All of that is in your normal paragraph. So you actually stopped HIP halfway through and went back to explaining initiative, referendum, and recall. So if this is yours, take this first one on the purpose and expand the purpose of the document rather than just heading into initiative, referendum, and reform. Okay? So that'd be the first one I would say for that one. Okay, so the next one. So notice in this one, so President Theodore Roosevelt wrote and presented this speech to Providence during the era. The era helped maintain unfair business practices. I don't really understand your sentence there. It doesn't make much sense. Both of these took advantage of the government and its laissez-faire economic strategies to swindle the middle and lower class. And then Theodore Roosevelt was addressing the problems created by the people. So you're kind of just talking about the time period. You're not really telling me about the document itself or what would have led to it. So if this is yours, adjust this to specifically talk about trust. Make sure you're using language of the question stuff prior to or contextualizing. Make sure the reader is obvious because it's really hard for me to tell. I think you're contextualizing, but I can't really tell in this one of what you're trying to do. So let's see the next one. Hold on. Okay. Uh-oh, did one of you delete yours? Okay, here it is. Okay. All right, so this would be an example of one that is really heavily just like everything is thrown out there. So the purpose of the Anti-Saloon League was to try to stop alcohol. Now, first off, notice how it's the purpose of the Saloon League and not the document. You need to be purposing the document, not the Anti-Saloon League. And then notice it says it was most successful, temperance, and then they go from Anti-Saloon League to temperance to Carry Nation. All of this is your regular paragraph. This is not HIP analysis, okay? So if this is yours, this is not HIP. This is your regular paragraph that we're going to go in a little bit later. Okay, the last one. Okay, so I want to go into a couple of good ones. Okay, so notice on this one. Okay, so notice this one has the purpose of Roosevelt's speech is to convince the listeners and trust the monopolies are bad for Americans and the economy. He says it's America's duty to regulate them. He appeals to listeners' emotions. All of this is good. So notice how they're specifically talking about the document, the speech itself. They're not just talking about in general things as well. Okay, this would be a good example of intended audience. So the intended audience is the state of California. They believe there should be a popular government, should be run by people alone. It introduced the new policies. This is more of a purpose down here. So I would say the intended audience is up here, but you more head into like the purpose as well. So you're kind of doing two HIP analysis, but that one is pretty good. Any questions on HIP before we move on? Okay, so from there, now we're going to put all of our stuff together into our actual essay. So what I want you to grab out is your, this document that we've been working on, so your outline. So your Dbq outline is what I want you to start with. Looks like this. You should already have done it. And then I also want you to grab out the document that says body paragraph options. So those are the different ones you should have out. Body paragraph options, as well as your outline. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what your outline looks like and what your actual essay looks like. So I'm about to hand out to you a document that I actually gave you back in September, and I'm sure you've already lost it, so I'm going to go ahead and give it to you again. Yeah? Is he like gone a while?
No, like 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay. Bye, Owen.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Okay. All right. So this rubric we're going to be going through. I personally would have something to write with so that you can have this rubric out, and I'm going to tell you where you get all your points. And if you're listening on the lecture, I'm sorry I don't have this, but you can come pick it up or Google it. Okay. All right, so AP History, Dbq rubric. We're going to go through how to get all of the points that you might want on the AP exam. All right, so if you look where it says A, thesis or claim, we've already done that. Okay? You need a thesis in your essay. All of you should have already written one, so you're good to go. Contextualization, you've already written that too. So you should already have that prepped and ready to go. Okay? If you want to bracket A and B, those are your opening paragraph. And you can also write next to it, that's the same as an LEQ. The first paragraph never changes whether you write an LEQ or a DBQ. So now we're getting into category C, which is the evidence points. So for the evidence points, okay, I'm going to explain my best of how to be able to do this. So your number one evidence point, talking about the documents. Now, do you guys say where it says you talk about at least 3 of the documents? We're going to ignore number 1. And the reason why, do you feel like you're going to pass the exam if you only talk about 3 documents on the DBQ? No. Okay. So there's no point in even trying. The average student on last year's DBQ got a 1.8, which means most people only got 2 or less points on the CBQ. This point is like the pity people point. Okay? If you get a 1 on your DBQ, it is usually a pity point from the readers. They try really hard not to give people a 0 or a no score if possible. Okay? So we don't care about that point. But what you gain for that point is just talking about the document. So if I look at option 1, which I want you to read along with me so that you can be able to see this. So if all I write is the progressive era fostered political change through reform for minorities. One example was the NAACP's attempts to lobby for the removal or addition of laws and policies. This can be seen in the letter to Woodrow Wilson, which states that the NAACP believes these policies should change. If all I do is talk about how the NAACP made a difference, even if it's 2 sentences long or less, I get a point. Okay? Now remember, that's a pity point. I've read a lot of 1-point essays or 0-point essays, and that's what they try to do because they think that'll pass the exam. We care about or 2 points. So that's what we want to care about is or 2 points on this evidence section. So to earn 2 points, you must use 6 documents in order to support your argument, as in change or continuity politically during the Progressive Era. If you will cross out 6 and put 7. So if you took AP World or Euro in the past, you may have only been required to do 6. In my class, you're required to do 7. Here's the reason why. Let's pretend that you write the most incredible, most amazing essay in the entire world. It's 8 pages long. People are crying as they read it. Okay? Except you only use 6 documents. In one of the documents, you incorrectly analyze. Like that one we learned earlier where somebody put that Woodrow Wilson and was trying to please him. If you miss 1 document out of 6, you no longer get that point. So by doing 7, you get another chance. So that means that you can get 1 wrong and still get the points. That's why we do 7. So how do you get the point? If you want to write next to this, of however you want to do it, to get 2 points in the evidence category, using 7 documents, you 1, define the term or the topic, such as the NAACP, getting rid of political machines, initiative recall referendum. Point 2, how is it a change or a continuity? So number 1, using 7 documents, talk about what they were. And number 2, how is it a change or a continuity? That is just like an LEQ. Okay? So you get 2 points. That point, I will say the second point is one of the hardest to get because people don't use all the documents. That's what I really caution you again to do. Okay? So the one that I have up on the board, which does have an error, I wrote this kind of late at night because I thought it would help you guys, and I did the NAACP wrong, so sorry. But this would be an example of one that gets both points. So the Progressive Era fostered political change through reform for minorities. One example of minority reform movement was the NAACP's attempt to lobby for the removal or addition of laws and policy. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples. I don't know why I did it the other way. Sorry. Was an organization created in part by W.E.B. Du Bois to stop segregation. They attempted to end racial discrimination. The NAACP fostered change by lobbying for changing segregation laws. This can be seen in the literature of Woodrow Wilson. Do you guys see how this is clearly supporting my argument and talking about the document? Okay, any questions on how to do this? This is just an LEQ. So if you want to write next to evidence from the documents to 2 points, it's just an LEQ. In fact, last year, they say about 20% of students just wrote an LEQ. And they still got points. All right? So now let's look at evidence beyond the documents. If you will go back to your homework assignment and go to step number 5. So go back to your homework assignment and look at step number 5. So step number 5 is what's called evidence beyond the documents. If you will write next to that, I call this outside evidence. Outside evidence. So outside evidence is anything not specifically talked about in the documents. As long as that word, that phrase, that nuance is not referred to, you can talk about it. Now in step 5, you have an entire list of ones that you can use. The reason why we do T-charts is because we want to be able to get as many options for outside evidence as possible. So what you're going to do is you're going to talk about it in your essay. Now I'm going to give you 2 showings of ways that you can do this. So the first way, so if you scroll down to page number 3, the first way to do this is by talking about something that is part of the topic that you're already talking about. So in my case is the NAACP, and I'm going to talk about grandfather clauses, because that was a successful political change. So notice this is the exact same copied and pasted from above, and then I added one way that the NAACP successfully gained rights was through banning grandfather clauses. These clauses, and then I talk about it, and then I talk about why it was a change. If you want to put next to evidence beyond the documents, this should be about 3 sentences long. About 3 sentences long, or 2 very long sentences is normally about how it is. Now, what doesn't work, if on the far right side where it says to earn this point, this response must, if you will underline, must use more than a phrase or reference. Must use more than a phrase or reference. So, if I go back up here, this is what the option 2 is. Notice how I added something in that says the NAACP attempted to end racial discrimination, such as grandfather clauses that essentially banned African Americans from voting. This is just a phrase or a reference. I just threw grandfather clauses in there. Now, this really helps my first 2 evidence points, but it does not get that third one of outside evidence. Instead, it has to be expansive. It can't just be a reference or something thrown in there. Now, you can do this in the middle of it. Some people will choose to do it after doc number 5. It's whatever you want to do of how you want to do this. The other option for outside evidence is something that has absolutely nothing to do with any documents. So in this case, what I did is I decided to do another political change is women's rights. So notice how in this one I said another example of political change is through attempts at women's suffrage. And then I expanded on it and talked about how women's suffrage was a change. Both of these count as outside evidence. Okay? Now, if you will put, so where it says evidence beyond the documents, it says use at least 1 additional piece. If you will change 1 to 2. Everything we do 1 more than we need to, because then that guarantees it. The average one, by the way, has 4 outside evidences. I only require 2. Now, you might say, by the way, what is up with all these colors? Why is everything colored? When you go to do yours, you are going to color your essay just like mine. This will help you make sure that you have all the elements. So for the first 2, we always do color-coded things to make sure that you have all the elements that you need to for the AP exam. Now, the last section is your analysis and reasoning. The average student last year got a 0.2 on this section, which means the vast majority of students did not receive any points for this section. You are not going to be that student. You are going to successfully achieve the HIP analysis point. So, 1 point for at least 3 documents. What do you think the 3 is going to change to? 4. Okay. 4 documents are going to have a HIP analysis. Now, how you add it in is there's a couple ways you can do it. Most people will write their paragraph just like normal and then add it into the end. Some people will do the whole thing and then put the reference to the document. It's up to you. Doesn't really matter. Now, in the end, your documents can be a combination of a whole bunch of these different things. It could be, so this one has the paragraph and outside evidence and HIP analysis. It's up to you. Okay? Now, the last one is the complexity. So, by the way, next to the 1 point for at least 3 documents, if you will put above that HIPP, so you know that that's your HIP analysis. And the last one is the unicorn point that we've already talked about in the past. So, that is your, for the 1 point, is your continuities. What continued during the time period. Okay? Now, there's many ways you can do this. You can do outside evidence. So, for example, this whole thing is about continuities, all about women's rights. All these things are outside documents, so you can have it in there. This one is an actual document itself, so this one is talking about how Doc 5 is a continuity rather than a change. It's anything that's up to you. Okay? So how does this all come together? Now, your outline is going to be different for everybody. So, for example, let's pretend that my first category has 2 documents associated with it. Notice that I just copied and pasted A through F, and then copied and pasted it down here. So I do Doc 1 here, Doc 4 here. I can't really do anything, I can't make it individual for you guys because everybody's going to be completely different. Okay? Now, I want you to look for me really quickly. So if you go back to the day by day, if you will click on where it says Common Questions Explained. So what I did is throughout the day today, I've been making a list of common questions that people have been asking me This is a running list, which means I'm going to be continuing to edit this as time goes on. So if you end up having a common question, if you are at home by yourself and you don't know what you're doing, check common questions first. It may already be answered. So, most common questions I received today. First, how many paragraphs do I need? Well, that's up to you. Most people will do option 1. So if this is my thesis statement, and I have 4 change categories and 2 continuities, most people will do 1 paragraph for each of the categories. So paragraph 1, thesis and contextualization. Paragraph 2, criminal justice reform. Paragraph 3, doc 2, and go like this. This is how most people will do it. Some people will make giant paragraphs where they will combine everything into 1 giant paragraph. I've seen essays where it has 2 pages of no paragraph breaks. Okay? I personally don't like that, but if that's what you like, then there you go. And then some people go really intense and do option 3 where they do a different paragraph for every single document, even if doc 6 and 3 are the same the same topic. They create a different one. It's however you want to do it. But this is the most common one, would probably be option 1. Okay? How do you deal with a topic I've never heard of? Now, this is really important for your entire life. When you guys go to college, there's going to be some day when at 10:30 at night, you remember you have a 6-page essay due in 30 minutes. And you have to do what we called BSing it. Now, I'm not going to tell you what BS means, because I don't want to get in trouble. But what it does mean is it's basically faking it so that you can be able to get it across. So what do we do, for example, when we see a doc 3? Well, what we do is we interpret the document based on what you are seeing. And then you basically write it like normal based on what the document shows. So let me show you how you do document 3. So the progressive era fostered political change through criminal justice reform. One example of a criminal justice reform involved transforming juvenile justice. And then I just read the document and rephrased it. Juveniles had previously been treated as enemies of the state who would be punished for their crimes. However, during the progressive era, reform movements attempted to make them the state the guardian and focus on rehabilitation. This was a political change because it helped juvenile offenders be put back on the path to good citizenship and behavior. This can be seen in this document, which states that juvenile offenders should be treated differently and the state should be guardians to juveniles and not treat them as enemies. Do you guys see how I basically just took what I read and made it up? Okay, that's what you do. So, for example, if you were AP World last year, and hopefully this doesn't give you recurring nightmares from last year, but let's pretend that you got this document last year, which nobody knew what it was, and you have to somehow analyze this document. That's what you have to do. Sometimes you have to BS it and be like, oh yeah, teak, ebony, and other precious hardwoods. Oh, this is obviously about precious material trading, and I'm going to talk about precious materials and all that stuff because you have to BS it. Okay? Or you just do what most people did on the AP World exam, and they just completely ignored this document and pretended it didn't exist. Okay. I could look it up. Let's see what it says. All right. So, which document is it? Inlaid box. Okay. This was specifically an export to Portugal. It illustrates how important Portuguese markets had become to some Indian craftspeople. And because it was an expensive object, it shows how luxury good consumption of European elites who had economic resources. There you go. Now, obviously, some of you are like, okay, obviously I never got the point for this. This is kind of sometimes what happens, unfortunately. So you just try your hardest. That's the point. All right, so that's the next common questions. Okay. So how do I make a paragraph that has multiple documents attached? You just continue on. So in this one, I have a paragraph on Taylorism. I have a HIP, and then I just start into the next one. Another example of criminal justice reform is juvenile justice, and then I just add it. It's however you want to do it. Some people like to make separate paragraphs. It doesn't really matter. How long does the outside evidence point need to be? We've already talked about that. Don't do merely a reference or a phrase. Expand. Okay, next one. What if I have a category that has multiple documents I want to hit? Can you combine them? The answer is no. The rubric has something called double dipping. What that means is you cannot double dip on documents or HIP analysis. So, for example, if I take this Taylorism one and then I attach to it at the end, prior to Taylorism and political bosses, it will only count as one HIP analysis, not two. So you have to make a different one if you want it to count as both. Okay? Can I have documents in my continuities? Yes. However, you should have already talked about them in the changes for the most part. So you can see in this one, I talked about how the NAACP also is a continuity. I would have already talked about Doc 5 previously. The biggest thing is unicorn points are worth 1 point compared to 4 of 7 on change. So if you're trying to cut stuff out, continuities are a good one to cut out. So be careful about relying on all your HIP analysis and documents in the past. This is what's, I don't know why I did that twice. Can I do HIP in my continuities? This is the same thing. Be careful about that because that's the last thing you should worry about is your continuities. All right? So, other than that, this is how basically it should end up. In the end, your final submission will end up looking something like this. Now, if you think, oh, perfect, I have it written for me. This isn't even your essay prompt, so you can't even use this, okay? So, in the end, it will have, I don't know why that's being weird. You have your contextualization, your thesis, you have the explanation, you reference your doc, you highlight it, you do your HIP, you do your outside evidence. So it'll end up looking like this giant thing with a whole bunch of highlights. That's what it'll end up looking like in the end. Now, if you say, Miss Ray, this is overwhelming. The good news is we have the next 40 minutes to try to figure it out. Okay? So this is what I would do. I would take this opportunity to go ahead and start working on a section. Some people, they still can't contextualize. How do I do historical context for this essay? Some people, I want to do a HIP. Some people, I want to do a whole paragraph and you tell me what points I get. It's whatever you want to do. This time is yours to work on it and ask questions. Okay? All right. So we're going to go ahead and start the work section. Now, in terms of today, I have noticed that a lot of people have been doing homework for other classes. I'm not sure if everybody just kind of like forgot to do homework, but I've noticed that's been a really big trend today. I've also noticed that a lot of people have been like using computers for what I call bad and not good, such as looking up memes or looking up the latest news information on the pardon that happened today. Those are all great things that you should be doing not in this class, okay? So please use this time to be able to do good things, not looking up tongue twisters and playing with their friends to see if they can do them, okay? That would be a poor example that another student did today, all right? So ready and go.